Gretchen and Maggie by David Smith. My cat Maggie came from an apartment building I once worked at in February of 2009. She was one of several cats living on the property. She was about 3 months old. I was one of several people who were feeding them. Maggie was being abused by two of the other cats when I fed them one morning, and that night after work I put her in a cage I borrowed and took her home. When we got home I put her in a bigger cage and kept her in the garage. She was wild and I couldn't touch her. Her face, head, and neck had scabs from being scratched by the other cats. I began putting Neosporin on them. I'd have to reach into the cage with the ointment on my finger, put it on her real fast, and take my hand out. Sometimes she would scratch me and sometimes she'd miss. I had a towel partially wrapped around my hand and arm for protection. After a few applications, she realized it was helping her and started letting me apply it. After a few days, I moved her into the house, but kept her in the cage. I was still applying Neosporin regularly. She loved it now. She healed very quickly, and I found out she had blue eyes. She was at least partly Siamese. She was letting me pet her more, but still didn't like to be held. After another couple of days, I began to let her out of the cage, and she had the run of the house. I put her back in each night. She was really good about going back in on her own. After a few more days, I put the cage away. As time went on, she became friendlier, but still doesn't like to be held for very long. She does tolerate it better, but still tenses up a bit. A year later, in April of 2010, Gretchen was born here. She was born outside. Her mother was a wild stray who came and went. I fed her, but couldn't touch her very much. When she was big enough, Gretchen was in and out of the house for a few days, then mostly stayed in. She attached herself to me right away. I would take her out in the evenings and weekends to be with her family and fed them, but her mom disappeared. We kept most of the kittens, but they weren't like Gretchen. Gretchen is the most unique cat I've ever had. From the beginning, Maggie followed Gretchen everywhere, playing with her, and playing with her, and playing with her, washing her, and cuddling with her at night. Gretchen was curious about everything and seemed to get into everything. Maggie was always right behind her. Whether Gretchen was in a box, in a cupboard, in the dryer, on the kitchen counter, in the bathroom, eating, or just hanging out. Maggie was always keeping an eye on her. Gretchen helped to mellow Maggie out. She wasn't so grumpy and started purring a lot more. I'd had Maggie spayed, so she couldn't have kittens. She was like a mother to Gretchen, and Gretchen showed me another side of Maggie. They're still together a lot, but don't play as much anymore or cuddle either. Sometimes they sleep together, but usually just when it's cold.